First time buyers out there, do you think it's tough? Perhaps it's not as tough as you actually think. But before we get into it and look at some real facts and figures, QVT. So this is going to be a brilliant topic if you are a first-time buyer and you're thinking about entering onto that market. Perhaps you're a bit nervous, you're not too sure what next steps look like. So this is going to be brilliant for you. And even if you're not watching this live, still feel free to put any questions in the comments or even any of your own case studies. We'd love to hear from you. Likewise, if you want to click and read through, obviously there is a lot of facts and figures in, so if you prefer to read the black and white, absolutely do that. But it's going to be a great one because your typical first-time buyer home in Fife roughly costs 113,334, which, let's face it, it is a lot of money in anybody's book. Now, for years, the housing affordability debate has been framed in terms of house prices compared to average incomes. And that makes a really neat headline, especially when it comes to the scaremongering out there, or even perhaps if you get bogged down in listening to friends and family and what they're telling you. And this is where it's absolutely crucial to look at the black and white facts and figures, do your research, and really know what you're entering into and what next steps looks like. And that's why these shows are absolutely brilliant for that. Because it isn't just how first-time buyers think. Because when you're weighing up your first home in Fife, the question isn't how many times my salary is the house worth. It's actually what slice of our take home pay will the mortgage basically swallow each month? Like, what am I basically putting into the mortgage each month? Now, what I want to say as we're actually doing this, Perrie, is we did a brilliant show, didn't we, last week in terms of renting and why actually staying in rented could actually cost you a lot more in the long run rather than just taking that leap and going onto the property market and getting your potential first property and what that looks like. So actually, if you're reading this or you're watching this and you're a first time buyer, also take the time to go back and watch last week's show as well, because it was brilliant and it gives you a really eye-opening, almost eye-watering idea into what you've potentially missed out on or what you absolutely have missed out on.
Absolutely, especially when you're talking about the eating into your equity pot and the property values are still increasing to go, aren't they? Which is a really vital point. If your property value is increasing and you're eating into that equity, you're actually making some funds for yourself, which is fantastic, as opposed to the renting situation, which is what we talked about in that. So again, that's a really good one for first-time buyers, because that is the fear factor, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And it is that, it's the fear, but it's how you educate yourself and get all of your homework done to help you make those informed decisions. And it really is, it's about looking through that lens and the story for five first-time buyers. It's very different from the doom and gloom that you potentially read or listen to. Yes, absolutely. We're not denying that it is tough today, because actually, as mortgage payments, they actually take 21.3% of a Fife first-time buyer's household income. 21% of your income. I wouldn't say gone just like that, because as you say, Perrie, it's going into obviously the equity, and it's obviously you've secured that property. It's an investment, but 21% of your salary has gone towards that.
And I think when you look at that in really easy terms as well, and I think that certainly for me, this is how my mind works. And for those that are reading or listening just now, that's a quarter of your income is going on your property. And I think sometimes when you say it like that versus 21%, although they're almost the same thing, to say that it's a quarter of your income is a bigger part of it, isn't it? But actually, it's a quarter of your income that's really a great investment for you. And that's what we've spoken about, isn't it?
Absolutely. So it is that. So yes, history does show that there were periods when it was far tougher. especially if we think back to the kind of like 1980s squeeze. Now, I'm not going to lie, Perrie, I feel a bit of a cheat talking about this considering I wasn't here. But the late 1980s squeeze, because those that perhaps were here at that time, if you were to cast your mind back, house prices were much lower in pound note terms, but actually your interest rates were punching 14.4%, which is really, really high percentage. Absolutely. So when you hear people speaking about the current base rate and current mortgage rates, actually, if we relate it back to the 1980s, 14.4%. To then put that into better terms, in 1989, first-time buyers in Fife were handing over 30% of their household income to cover your mortgage payments. So bearing in mind, we've just said at present 21.3%. Back in 1989, it was 30.1% of the household income, which is an even bigger chunk, absolutely.
I mean, it's a quarter of your income versus a third of your income, isn't it?
Exactly. So when you put it like that, it actually sounds worse. Absolutely. Now, the national average at the time was 47.2%. So actually, if you were in Fife at the time, you could say you were slightly better off because you weren't at the national average of your 47.2. But still, that 30%, some may say it was brutal. But actually, the point is simple. Fife house prices were much lower at 28,000 in 1989, but the mortgage burden was a lot higher. Affordability in its truest sense was way worse than it was today. Absolutely. And it's when you see the numbers like that, it really puts it into perspective for you. But bringing it back to a slightly more, we would say, current time, Perrie, not as dated as 1980, what would you say kind of 2007 looked like?
I think for me, there's a little bit of deja vu, or is there? But if you fast forward to the eve of the financial crisis, which I experienced in 2007, and it was quite frightening actually as a homeowner at that point, because we had no idea what interest rates were going to do, but also the property values had completely depreciated. So that really impacted people because, again, we talked about it last week, but what we then found in that time was that actually people were owed more on their property in a mortgage than the actual property was valued at. So it was a real big hitter for some people. And it was quite a scary and expensive experience as well. But on the flip side of that, if the average person roughly moves every 7 years, so if that happened at that point and you hadn't planned to move, then actually it didn't really concern or impact you. It really only impacted those people who had something going on in their lives at that moment that really meant that they had to move. And it became a real kind of critical line for them. So that was a really interesting time. And what we saw with Fife first-time buyers at that time was certainly their household income percentage-wise was then sitting at 33.5% of their outlay. So, we went from 21 to 30. We're now at 33 at that point. So it was kind of creeping in constantly into people's income. So definitely to see that against your mortgage was a big percentage, a third of your salary basically wiped out on a mortgage. So it kind of sounds familiar to the previous years, doesn't it? And it was a bit of another squeeze on people. But another peak and another squeeze came when the national average actually became 44.2%. That's nearly half of people's incomes.
Yep.
So the numbers absolutely do matter because they indicate that even in relatively recent histories, affordability was worse than it is today. And I think that's the key thing. Today's first-time buyers often tell the older generation, that would be me, that it was easier in your days. The numbers tell a completely different story though, and it's exactly what you say. Yes, it's easier in so much as only 20% of our income is going on property on a mortgage, but actually property values are higher. So it's almost mirrors the same scenario, but actually a more comfortable position because obviously salaries have gone up. So the salary increases has helped. The percentage of your income going to your property is much less and it's quite significant. And I think in today's world as well, you've also got two-income families, which historically wasn't a thing. So that has also assisted as well in making things a bit more affordable. But for me, actually, I like to kind of mirror back on it and think, well, actually, it's not that things were more difficult in the past or easier in the past. It's just that there were different scenarios. And actually, in today's world, it is a healthier position to be in for first-time buyers. If we then kind of flip that over to the peak of 2023, for instance, so that was a huge difference that we saw there. And if you talk about that recent pain, in 2023, the affordability rate in Fife was actually 22.2%. So again, that was less than quarter, so a good position to be in, and that's of the average household income. But that was the highest it had been in over 15 years. So mortgage costs kind of sorted themselves out, got back on the rising interest rates that we saw. Many first-time buyers put their plans on ice because interest rates were going up, because we had come out of the COVID period, hadn't we? And interest rates in the COVID period were just so appealing to everyone. I had that experience myself. I had a mortgage fixed on 5 years at 1.5%. Fast forward that, and we're now sitting at 4%. So there is a difference there. But actually, when you compare that to the 13s and 14s that were happening then, actually affordability is still really strong for first-time buyers, which is a great position for them to be in. Mortgage costs soared on the back of the interest rates rising. Many first-time buyers, as I said, did put things on hold, but yet, and this is a crucial thing that we need to look at, even at the peak of 2023, it was still 33.7% proportionally cheaper to buy a house now than it was in 2007, and 26.3% more affordable than to buy in the late 1980s. So absolutely, affordability is still an improved position. But when you see some headlines, it can be quite a scary thought, isn't it? And so I think that that's what kind of puts first-time buyers off. And as you mentioned, Sophie, earlier on, when we did that show last week on the first-time buyers and the conundrum that they have, really, and they almost have analysis paralysis, because they look at it for so long that they just decide, oh, it's just too much, it's overwhelming, I'm just going to stop and put the brakes on everything. But actually, it's really crucial that they move forward. And there is a glimmer of relief as well for first-time buyers just now. Since 2023. Don't know, you want to give some insight to that, Soph?
Absolutely, yes. So since 2023, you could say that the burden for Fife first-time buyers has gently started to ease. In 2024, the rate dropped 21.7%. And actually, by 2025, it is decreased to 21.3%. Still heavy, still demanding discipline, absolutely. But what we can see is it's trending in the right direction.
Yeah.
Now, this shift tells us two things. First, the market is not static as the environment for first-time buyers moves year to year. And actually, secondly, affordability must be measured not just in pounds on a price tag, but actually as a kind of living, breathing percentage of your real household income. Now, the role of wages and inflation. Now, your average UK home today is 34,000 cheaper than it was in 2022. Obviously, once that's been adjusted for inflation. And at first glance, that might sound impossible. You're thinking, how? But this is where we're going to explain. So the average value of a UK home in 2022 was around 270,000. Now, bearing in mind, this has gone UK wide, not particularly Fife based. This is UK wide, was around 270,000. But actually, in the last 3 years, there's been an inflation of 11.45%. Therefore, a British home that cost 270,000 in 2022 would need to be worth 304,000 in today's money to stand still regarding inflation. To basically, what we mean by that is to have the same spending power. Now, the average UK house price today is 270,000, just £400 more, or 0.5% more. Now, That gap means the real value of a home has dropped by 11.3%. So when you think, obviously, inflation at your 11.45% that we mentioned, less your 0.5% of the house price growth makes up that 11.3%. So basically, to put it another way, or to kind of put the numbers out, your UK homes are effectively 11.3%, or, like we said at the beginning, 34,000 cheaper than they were obviously 3 years ago in the height of 2022. But what would you say that looked like in terms of wages, Perrie?
I think that's the same thing. People need to compare what the property values are versus what their wages are and take into account inflation. We've spoken about that. And it's constantly changing, inflation. I did the UK House Price Index show last week, actually. And inflation, the government target was to have it down to 4%, to 2% by the end of the year. And it's currently sitting well over 4%. So that's quite scary. And food inflation actually is the biggest thing, sitting at 5%. So people are kind of feeling that actually that's impacting them when they go to the supermarkets too. And all of that comes into your budgetary requirements when you're putting together your affordability status, doesn't it? So taking into account your wages obviously does come into it along with the value of property. So for me, if you look at the UK headlines for wages, for instance, 16.28% wages are higher today than they were since 2022. So that makes it more affordable for people. Take inflation off of that, the wage rise is actually 16.28%, which gives you really wage growth of just short of 11.5% versus inflation. So in real after inflation wages are actually about 5% higher. So there's lots of stats in there, and sometimes it can take a little bit to get your head around that if you're watching or listening to this. So by all means, feel free to click on the link because you can actually read through it and it'll give you the real breakdown of everything, because we're kind of skipping through some of it. We're just giving you the highlights here. So while headline house prices show that it's kind of a nominal term that has changed and that they've almost kind of flatlined is what they're saying, buyers are actually spending power. Their spending power has really strengthened. And that's the key thing for first-time buyers, that their buying power has strengthened, their wages are higher than the values that the properties are going up by. So it puts them in a good position. So if you combine those both things that are actually quite rare, affordable housing, good wages, properties are 11.3% cheaper in real terms, and incomes are 4%, just short of 5%, in fact, higher in real terms. So add the fact that interest rates, while they're still not, of course, we appreciate, down at what they were kind of post-COVID, where you were getting like 1.5%, 2% mortgages, we absolutely appreciate that. But interest rates are still at good levels, and actually at some of the lowest levels that we've seen since 2010. So that's 15 years. We're still seeing some of the lowest levels ones there. So that is a big impact for people as well when they're looking at the mortgages. And I don't actually think that they'll ever be as low as that again, to be honest with you. So I think what we're seeing at the moment is going to be the norm. And actually, if I was anyone out there, for me, certainly what I did is I got in touch with my financial advisor, and I have fixed on a 5-year deal at the moment. We just did that last month, Billy and I, because actually then I know what my outgoings are, I know what my income is, and that will only increase hopefully. But I know that my affordability is there because I know what I'm going to be paying each month on my mortgage for the next 5 years. So again, it's about taking account of that. And as I mentioned earlier, if the average person moves home every 7 years, for a first-time buyer, again, seek professional advice on this from a financial advisor. But if you're in the position where you can get a good 4 or 5 year fixed deal and you have no intentions of moving before that point, then actually it's a win-win for you because you can fix it. You know what your income expenditure is, and actually all going well. And what we're seeing in this trend is that your income is continually going to go up. So actually that impacts you in a positive way in regards to your expenditure. So that's something definitely to be thinking about. So I did, and we've applied it, and it's really worked for us. So I think for me as well, what we're also seeing is there's more houses coming to market, so that makes it a bit more competitive for first-time buyers as well. Gives them some really good choice. But the balance has definitely shifted. Buyers now have more choice, but crucially, they also have more negotiating power, because again, what we're seeing, generally your first-time buyer is buying a property maybe from a downsizer. So for a downsizer to have that comfort when they buy their next place and find their next ideal home, it's actually quite nice to have that first-time buyer there. because the first time buyer doesn't have a chain and it kind of stops with them, so it can be nice and tidy depending on what that chain looks like. So it just makes the stepping stones a wee bit easier as well, and can be quite a good position of strength, can't it?
Oh, 100%, absolutely. Even more so if you've actually, yes, you're a first time buyer, but you've got your ducks in a row, you've already got your mortgage in principle, and you've done all of that to show that you are keen and you're interested and you're ready to move. But yeah, if that chain can be neat, then absolutely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And I think people, as I mentioned earlier on, people are taking into account that, inflation has definitely eaten into a significant bit of the family budget. Certainly in the food shop, I noticed that. I mean, you go to the supermarket and your basket is definitely more expensive this year than it was last year. Everyone is seeing that. But, we're all quite savvy shoppers, and there's lots of great supermarkets out there that are helping people on a budget, which is great. But unlike the 1980s wages, wages have also been rising. So actually, whilst food inflation is going up, the wages are going up too. So one's kind of interacting the other a little bit. And as long as you've got a fixed mortgage and you understand what your monthly outgoings are, it puts you in a real position of strength. So I think that people can actually see waivers in their budget where they're going over the next 12 months. For me, I'm kind of pretty much fixed for the next 5 years. So actually my position will improve year on year, which is a good place to be. And first time buyers tend to be quite savvy that way as well. And they tend to fix their mortgages for at least 2, 3, 4 or 5 years, depending what their plan is. So if you take that into account, that really helps. And again, it's why the proportion of your income going to your mortgage payments hasn't really rocketed back to the eye-watering numbers that we've seen previously and in previous generations, to be honest with you. I remember when we bought our first flat, it was 27,000, and my mortgage was almost the same as what I'm paying just now, and that was back in 1993.
Oh.
So, as an actual person who's lived through those examples that we're giving, I can absolutely vouch for those numbers. So absolutely, but it's all relevant to you and your current circumstance, isn't it? And that's what people have to judge. So it's about being really savvy, and first-time buyers are getting quite savvy just now as well, because your average first-time buyer as well is a more mature person. When I was a first-time buyer, we were buying at 23, 24. Your average first-time buyer now is almost 30.
Yeah.
So if you think about that logically as well, that person in their 30s who's that first-time buyer has potentially, they've gone through all of their education, they've worked out what their career path is, they've probably secured a really good job that actually is going to increase their wages year on year. So they're in much more of a secure place. They're not as vulnerable, I guess, because their career path generally has been mapped out for them. Because they're at that age group as well, the chances are they've got a good deposit. So again, that helps you with regards to your loan to value. So there's all of these real positive things that come into play here as well. And that's what really the first time buyers today are tapping into. But I think why the headlines talk about asking prices of houses, it does distract people, I think, because people don't really have all the background information. Why would it distract them, Sophie?
Absolutely. I think it is right. Sometimes people do get bogged down in all that kind of outside noise. Because yes, absolutely. If you were to look at perhaps a Fife starter home today and you compare perhaps obviously against your salary, perhaps it is eye-watering, absolutely. But the raw multiple of income to house price is a misleading way to judge your affordability. What matters is whether the monthly mortgage outgoings really are sustainable and they are comfortable for you. And that is the key here. And that's why you need to get that expert advice and make sure you do all of your homework. Now, this perspective also explains why so many buyers do obviously take the plunge eventually. As obviously Perrie's just mentioned, it is slightly later now than what it used to be, because a £100,000 property asking price, or a headline asking price with a 95% mortgage, absolutely might seem daunting, but a monthly payment of £495 once your wages are factored in, that sounds more achievable when you break it down into little manageable chunks, especially if you're renting. Because what are you actually paying on rent? So if you can own a property and your monthly mortgage payment is 495, you can sometimes be paying that in rent for a 1 or a 2 bed flat. So actually, if you can then eat into your equity and you've actually secured and you're on the property ladder and you've got that investment, then absolutely take the plunge. Just do your homework beforehand. And as Perrie obviously said, all that when you factor in that 495 is based on obviously your current salary? Is that potentially going to go up if you've obviously locked in that career and that job? So break it down and think of it like that. Don't automatically look at it as this big price ticket of potentially 100,000 and just go, nope, and back out of it.
That's the easy way to do it. I often do this when I look at something, because I'm quite methodical when I go through the process of monetary things. And I literally sit and I think, well, actually, if I look at that change in my income as an expense over a monthly situation, I generally break that down to a week, and then you maybe break it down to a day, and you think, well, actually, it actually works out as a cost of coffee, Starbucks coffee. There's plenty of other coffee places out there, but do you know what I mean? If you work it out, well, actually, it's what I'm spending on that. If I then just took my own flask of coffee or did something else, then actually it wouldn't impact my expenditure. So it's about how you work things out as well, and the monetary things as well. And I think for me, peaks and troughs are really all about perspective as well, and how they impacted you and what you believe or don't believe, or the headlines you read, or what your nan told you or your mate told you, or it's really about understanding those things. And I think history shows us that actually the property journey is quite cyclical. It just really goes round and repeats itself, but there are always going to be peaks, there will always be troughs. And affordability is always more kind of nuanced than actually you think it is, compared to what the headlines are suggesting. And I think that's the thing, isn't it? You've got to really just take that into account and really understand it from your perspective. You've got some really good graph information to show here as well about first-time buyers, haven't you, Soph?
Absolutely, yep. That should be up on the screen now to have a wee look at. And sometimes it is that being able to see that kind of visual representation. So what this is showing you is percentage of Fife first-time buyers' household income on their mortgage payments. So you can see obviously the years along the bottom, and we obviously touched on 1980 and then 2007 and obviously 2023, but this gives you a real indication. So that is the percentage that their monthly salary and how much they're paying towards their mortgage and what that looks like. So obviously, as Perrie said, 30% of it in the high here, so that's a third of your salary. It then right at the top in 2007 at 33.5%. Now, obviously, when we were giving you those figures the last time as well, we touched on the UK quite a bit, but this is Fife specific. So actually, so for example, 2025, you're 21.3% of your Fife first times buyers home income on their mortgage payments. But I think the key here is to literally, you can look at that and see, oh, actually, it declined. Yes, it's gone up, obviously, in the last couple of years, and it has, and then it's leveled off again. But it's nowhere near as high as it was in your 2007 and your 1980. And I think that's the key here, that this will potentially help with the scaremongering, because that's just right there, not black and white, it's in red, for you to see. For you to see that it's not as drastic as perhaps the scaremongering or the other outside noises are telling you. And you'll be able to see that graph as well if you click obviously the blog and have a read through. You'll be able to get a real good nosy at it. It's quite easy to understand. It's not as rough as you perhaps have been led to believe, we could say.
Absolutely. I think my final thoughts on this as well is buying your first home will never feel easy. You're always going to be nervous. It does take savings, and that can be difficult because we want to enjoy life, but you've got to be quite strict with yourself. It takes sacrifice as well, because you might not have to do things to be able to put that money aside to be able to buy the property. But it actually takes some courage as well, and commitment. And I think if you do that and you don't fall for all the myths and all the noise that you're hearing, you can put yourself in a really strong position. And actually your affordability now is much easier than it was previously. I know everyone is in a different situation, and we totally appreciate that, and that's why it's really important to get some really good financial advice. And if you were looking to be put in touch with somebody, we can certainly point you in the right direction. But get some good advice, understand what it means to you, and just be open-minded about the commitment that it takes. And don't be surprised or swayed by others' opinions. Investigate it for yourself would be my top tip, really.
Absolutely. And we would absolutely love to hear from you. Is what we've discussed today a little bit of a shock to you? Are you surprised by it, or are you actually were you expecting those kind of facts and figures and insights? We'd love to hear from you, so put it in the comments. Even if you're not watching this live, put it in the comments and give us your thoughts. But always make informed decisions and seek the right help. That's definitely my final thoughts, Perrie.
Perfect. Fantastic. And that's us for this week. We'll see you next time. Take care.
Amazing. Take care. Bye for now.